One of the questions I get asked the most on this channel are, where should I start with Brandon Sanderson, Mike? Well, I got a few options for you. Hey, what's up, bookworms and Mistborn? Mike back today to talk about Brandon Sanderson and more particularly that little thing called the Cosmere that we know and love so much. But not all of us know and love the Cosmere, because I still get asked the question quite frequently, Mike, where should I start with the Cosmere? Because I'm really confused. Now, the question I get most is, where should I start with Brandon Sanderson? And I can only recommend Cosmere books to you guys because I've only read his Cosmere stuff. I have not read all of his YA stuff outside of the Cosmere. I also haven't read White Sand, so I can't give you any advice on that one. But everything else in the Cosmere I have read, and I'm going to kind of give my suggestions on not only where you should start, but if you can start with other parts of the Cosmere as well. So I guess the first question that I would get asked is, what exactly is the Cosmere? I like to think of it as, if you imagine Stephen King's multiverse. I think where you have the same characters that can kind of show up in other series. They can bounce around between places, be in different stories, crossover, things like that. Maybe some Easter eggs and things of that nature. So I think it's all within a shared universe. So I want people to understand this isn't quite the MCU. This isn't something where you've got to read every single book in a particular order. You're going to be confused why this character's there, why this character's dead, where this one's coming from, what they're talking about, things like that. It definitely is not in that way. It is very much something you can read this in any order. That's the thing about it, guys. As long as it's a series and you're starting with book one, it really doesn't matter. So that's the biggest question I want to get out of the way first. You can do it whenever you want, wherever you want. So with that said, I do have some suggestions about where I think that you should start based off of a couple of factors. So each of these kind of stands on their own, remember that, but I'm going to kind of talk about where that I would recommend that you start. The number one answer I get to where I should start with Brandon Sanderson and the Cosmere is, of course, the original Mistborn Trilogy. Maybe that's because it's where I started with Brandon Sanderson, was reading Mistborn. Maybe it's because I think there may be some nostalgia attached to that. I don't know. I hadn't read a ton of fantasy at the point when I read Mistborn, so I will admit that maybe some of it's nostalgia. I'm not sure. What I do know is I think that this has one of the best magic systems I've ever read in a book. Now, I'm a soft magic guy, and Brandon Sanderson is very much a hard magic guy. So taking this magic system and just kind of exploding it to a way that made it really cool for me, and he actually used, the elemental chart, and you actually can look at these metals that these people are burning. They're like alchemists, and seeing that they're actually like a table that you can follow. I just became obsessed with that magic system. So if you haven't read a lot of heavy magic systems and you want a place to kind of start, this is definitely the place to go to, because unlike a lot of other people's hard magic systems, he does kind of hold your hand in this one and kind of tell you kind of how everything works. And if not, you've got that chart to reference, like I said. But I think it's got a really big cast, some lovable kind of rogues and some very detestable villains that you cannot help but kind of root against. But it is very much traditional fantasy, and then you got like the orphaned protagonist, and then you've got the Dark Lord antagonist. So I think there's lots of things that you will feel familiar about, but there are definitely some new wrinkles and some things I think that make it feel very fresh. But I feel like this is just the surface level of things that would happen on the whole with Scadrial here. That's the world here, is just the surface of the Cosmere, because I didn't know until I was about halfway through Stormlight Archive that this world was actually connected. So there's the thing about this. Again, you can read these and be fine with it, but this one, I think Mistborn particularly, is easily accessible to any fantasy fan. It might not seem up to your standards if you've read, a lot of more heavy fantasy. If you're just getting into it, I think it'll be perfect. Things like that. Just kind of really depends on where you're at in your life, what your expectations are. But I always tell everyone the best place to start with Brandon Sanderson is the original Mistborn Trilogy. Unless you're looking for something a little bit heavier, and I got to talk about the Stormlight Archive, which of course is my favorite of Brandon Sanderson's series. Now, the Stormlight Archive, say you want something a little more complex than Mistborn, you want something a little more epic in scope. Say you just finished reading Wheel of Time and you're looking for the next thing to replace that, kind of in the same vein. This is what you're looking for, guys. Start with The Way of Kings, because that is one of the greatest fantasy books ever written. And The Words of Radiance right after it is also one of the greatest fantasy books ever written. So this guy really knocked it out of the park right away with the Stormlight Archive. And I'll say, like I said, if you just finished Wheel of Time and you kind of feel like you need something similar, I feel like it's different enough that you're not going to feel like, oh, this is just, I'll just go read Wheel of Time again. But I think that there's a lot of things that Wheel of Time fans are going to enjoy about the series. And I don't know if that's just because Brandon Sanderson worked on Wheel of Time. I read this series before I read Wheel of Time, so I can't say for sure there. But with me, when I was reading it, I was like, when I started reading Wheel of Time, I was like, oh, I can see where Brandon Sanderson did get some things that he really was influenced by in the Stormlight Archive. So that's coming from my point of view. I think that with this, everyone seems kind of more leveled up over what they were in Mistborn. You know, the characters are more varied, more adult. The magic system's definitely much, much different. His character work is miles improved, I think, over the Mistborn Trilogy, which I didn't have a huge problem with his characters in that. But I feel like the characters in this are much more damaged and much more realistic. They're not much, they aren't as idealized, I think, or there isn't going to be a lot of those, this reminds me of this character from this story and that story. I think this was going to have very unique characters, and the relationships are developed really, really well over the course of these just tomes of books, because they are very, very long books, but they're very, 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 very good. But the world of Roshar just feels so much bigger than that of Scadrial in the Mistborn trilogy. This world is just gigantic. It's continued to keep getting built over the first 4 books in this series. There's still so many parts of that map we haven't touched yet. So there's things that we haven't seen that I can't wait to see. But I think that if you do, you're pretty much really into epic fantasy. Now look, the thing with Brandon Sanderson, guys, is you're never going to get grimdark. You're never going to get bad language, over-the-top violence or sex, those kind of things. Brandon Sanderson is very much a family fantasy kind of guy. Now, I know a lot of people want to think that assumes that he is YA. I don't think so, because I know if I had been reading Stormlight Archive when I was very, very young, I probably would have been confused. I don't know. That really, guys, it kind of depends on you. I think that really just matters when you really started reading, epic fantasy. But with this, I would say it does feel like, I still say it feels adult, but it just doesn't have the bad language and, the really explicit violence and sex and things like that. That's just Brandon Sanderson as a whole. He comes up with his own swearing systems. Not just magic, he has his own swearing systems, so he has his own created bad language and things like that. That's kind of how he gets around that barrier. But these are very much PG-13 books, I guess I would say. So take that for what you will. I do think they're accessible, like I said, to pretty much all audiences. I do think you should probably have read a few more fantasy series before you get into this, but again, that's just going to kind of depend on you there. But the only real downside of the Stormlight Archive for me, guys, it's not finished. That's the only really downside of it. It's not finished, and it's not going to be for a long, long time. He takes 3 years between each one of those books. He writes a ton of things in between them, and he wants to do 10 books overall, but he wants to do it like 2 sets of 5. So between 5 and 6, he's planning on taking a much longer break than 3 years. So, guys, I don't even know if I'll still be alive when the series is finished. But the man does write really fast. I do wish he'd focus on just Stormlight for a while, but I understand he wants to do other things. He's got so many different ideas. So there is that. But thankfully, he's got other series, guys, that can keep you, busy until then. So say instead you'd like to start with, the thing that I think is a unicorn in fantasy, and that is the standalone. And I think Warbreaker is a terrific standalone. This is one of my favorite standalones in all of fantasy, and this is one of my favorite editions in all of fantasy. I love these leather-bound editions. They are pricey, but they are so, so nice, guys. They really, really are. But Warbreaker is a book that completely blew me away, because say you don't want a big series. I think this is definitely the place to go. Now, he does say that he wants to continue this, but right now there's no plans in stone or whatever. But he has said he wants to continue this series, and I'd be excited for it, but I do kind of like the idea of it is a standalone. However, guys, I think if you start here, there's things that are going to make sense even more in the Stormlight Archive, because this one, I think more than any other, feels like a companion piece to the Stormlight Archive. Now, I mean that in a good way. Now, I don't mean that also, I don't mean you have to read this before you read Stormlight Archive. I don't mean you have to read Stormlight Archive before you read this. I just say there are at least 3 characters I'm thinking of off the top of my head right now that show up in Stormlight Archive. And it helps give you some idea of what these characters are about when they show up in that world, and wonder how did they get here and what's happened to them since then. So I think for that reason alone, and for a particular weapon in this book, I think it's definitely something that I think that you should read if you plan to read the Stormlight Archive. But it doesn't matter which order. I would suggest reading this between books 1 and 2 of Stormlight Archive if you're going to do it that way, just because of certain characters that get introduced in book 2. But again, it doesn't change a lot if you don't. It feels just as good if you read it in any order and then be like, oh, so that's why this happened. So again, that's on you. But as for this book, guys, it's just awesome. It subverts expectations in every way, never an insult, and it has some of the most shocking twists and reveals in his entire series. I think that there's one surprise like heel turn in this story that shocked me so much. I was in the bargaining stage for a while. Maybe they're actually doing this. Now, yeah, it's some really brutal stuff, and that shows his character work. And I think Vivenna might be is a top 5 character for me in all the Cosmere. I love that character. I think it's definitely one of his best. So, highest I recommend for Warbreaker. I absolutely love it. And if you want to start there, I think it would work out just fine. As for after that, guys, I don't know if you want to start with Mistborn Era 2. I think you can, because here's the thing: is it takes place in Scadrial, just like the first Mistborn, but it's hundreds of years later, maybe thousands. I can't keep clear on the timeline. It's a long time ago, and basically all the characters from the original Mistborn trilogy are kind of talked about as like legendary figures at this point, almost like a religion. So you could do it that way, and it would make sense on its own, I think. But I don't know. It really just kind of depends. If you're really into westerns, or you want like some gunpowder, Weird West, Flint Hawk kind of fantasy, I think this would work with you. Because the thing with this is it does still have allomancy, which is the same magic system from Mistborn, which is metal based. So obviously you're adding guns and bullets to this. His magic system's going to take a whole new level with messing with metals. So I think it could work for you on your own. I just don't know that you would necessarily be happy starting here. Now, look, this is a very divisive series, Era 2. Whereas I feel like most Sanderson fans adore Mistborn Trilogy. This one, they're kind of hit or miss. Like, for me, it didn't really land that well. I like this book a lot. After this, it just kind of went to the point where, like, I don't even know if I want to read book number 4 that's coming out, I believe, this year. I don't even know, because I'm not really counting down to it. But I feel like where he missed with me on this one is the characters. The characters aren't as good as they were in Mistborn. So, yeah, they never really meshed with me that well. So that's why it didn't really work for me. But a lot of people love it. A lot of people say they like this more than Era 1. But as far as if you should start here, I don't really know. Like I said, folks either love it or hate it. I guess it's going to kind of depend on you. Now we're getting down into the, I don't want to say the dregs of the Cosmere, but some stuff that maybe I wasn't nuts about. Now, I wasn't nuts about Elantris. I wasn't at all. This takes place on the planet of Sel, but also the Emperor's Soul takes place on these same planets. So while I feel like this is Brandon Sanderson's first book, so you can see some things like he was still kind of learning his way. And what I said when I reviewed this years ago was, if this is the worst book that Brandon Sanderson has to offer us, he's a gift, and we don't deserve him. I still stick by that. This book was kind of a miss for me because the characters were very, very, very dry. He was still learning his way. The magic system was really just right in your face. He didn't really take his time with it really to explain it to you very well. It's just kind of like, this is just the way it is, kind of way that he kind of explains it in this. But however, with this book, I do like the idea of the same story being told from 3 different points of view. That really did make it really interesting to see that no bad guys think that they're the bad guys. I love that. I've always loved the triad writing system. It's really something that's done very well. However, but like I said, you can tell it's the first book in that series. But however, The Emperor's Soul, guys, that is one of the best received books in his entire Cosmere. And it is, to the point to where he said he wants to write a sequel to Elantris. I'm like, can we just write a sequel to Emperor's Soul instead? Or who knows, maybe have all those characters from Elantris and Emperor's Soul meet up. Sure, let's do that. Because I would love to see that character in that magic system again. God, I can't remember what the magic system was called. But it was really cool. I really did enjoy it. I read that like 3 years ago, guys. I've slept so much since then. But yeah, very cool magic system in Emperor's Soul, and the characters were just phenomenal in that. And it's very, very short read. And the cool thing about that, guys, is you don't have to buy the hardcover of Emperor's Soul. You can get it in Arcanum Unbounded, which is a collection of novellas and short stories. Now, I think it would be insane to start here, guys, because a lot of these are short stories and novellas that kind of flesh out the universe of the Cosmere, of all these other things that you've already read. So I think that you would be spoiling the hell out of a lot of things. A lot of things aren't going to make any sense to you, so it would be really, really insane to kind of start here. But I do think that this is incredible value for the fact that it has Emperor's Soul, which is sold on its own as well within these pages. So I say go ahead and pick that up. And if you can, buy it off his website, and he'll sign it for you like he signed mine. But yeah, that's really my suggestion of where you should and should not start, guys. I love the Cosmere. I know that a lot of people think because I have criticisms of it that I don't love it. I really love this universe. I mean, one of the reasons I love Stephen King so much is because of that multiverse he's built. And I feel like, the Cosmere is very much the fantasy version of that. I feel like he really has created a big, big universe, bigger than Stephen King's because it leaves the planet Earth, obviously. So I think that he's just going to kind of keep making these things kind of connect more and more. Like when you get later in the Stormlight Archive, you start getting like name drops of some of these other planets and stuff. So they are starting to feel like, okay, we're going to have like this big like in-game moment where everything meets up eventually is where it kind of feels like it's headed. But there's so much still planned. He plans to do a Mistborn Era 3 and 4. There's lots of additions coming. With me, I'm most excited for Stormlight Archive number 5 because that is going to be kind of a wrap on that first arc of that story and most of those characters, so I'm excited for that. But again, I hope this has answered some of your questions, has helped a lot a bit. Look, if you want individual reviews, guys, I have reviewed every single one of these books on the channel. You can find that playlist right here. In 2020, I just said I'm going to lock down and read everything and review everything by Brandon Sanderson within the Cosmere. Now, I didn't get to White Sand, like I said. That is just a graphic novel, which even the most ardent Knights Radiant have not had very many nice things to say about. So I didn't make it a rush to do that, and I didn't review some of those short stories and novellas, but I have read them, and I recommend that you guys do too. But again, best place to start, guys, I would say Mistborn or Stormlight Archive, just depending on you. Or if you want that standalone, you can't go wrong with Warbreaker. So guys, it's really all I got for the where should I start question. What about you? Where do you think people should start? Where did you start? There are obviously no wrong answers here, guys. So why don't you go ahead and drop in the comments and let me know, guys, and I will talk to you there.